Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name's Stephen Holmes, and I'll be hosting this discussion around the latest goings-on at CQC. Over the past few days, there have been some major developments within CQC following a fairly tumultuous past year. CEO Ian Trenholm has stepped down, and in the past day, we've seen a problem statement from interim CEO Kate Taroney alluding to the fact that the CQC is not functioning properly and is failing to keep service users safe. I'm delighted to introduce two of the UK's foremost health and social care experts to discuss the events of the past few days and months. Simon Cavadino is a former CQC Inspector and Director of the Woodberry Partnership. And Neil Grant is a partner at Gordon's Partnership Solicitors and a health and social care expert. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
So I'm going to hand straight over to you two to kick things off with your thoughts on recent developments.
Okay, well, last week, Neil and I published an article about CQC and about these very issues, which made some fairly strong and contentious claims. The central claim that we made was that CQC's new inspection regime isn't fit for purpose. And then, as you say, on Tuesday, we received the news that Ian Trenholm had resigned with almost immediate effect. And then late the day after, the Health Service Journal published the article that reported, as you say, and I quote from Kate Taroney, that stakeholders in the Department of Health and Social Care are losing confidence in our ability to deliver our purpose. So that's quite strong. Our article's claim was, as I say, that the CQC's new approach is not fit for purpose. And we set out how we believe that CQC's new approach was, the way it was implemented was fundamentally flawed. And it was based upon a fatally flawed set of assumptions about inspection ratings, what they are and how they're arrived at. Now, I would say, and we would say, that a CQC rating, it's not a fact or a score, it's a description. And it's a description based upon human judgments. It's not a numerical calculation. It's not quantitative, it's qualitative. That's largely because care is an abstract thing. It's felt and experienced mostly by the person being cared for, but also in the eye of the caregiver and people who are witnessing that. And feeling cared for or caring for somebody, it's kind of an emotional state. It involves love and respect and resilience and kindness and any number of other things. It's a desire to relieve anxiety and suffering on the part of another. It's a desire to increase the quality of a person's well-being while also reducing risk. I could go on and on and on. The point is that the concept of care is kind of infinitely complex. It's ineffable. It's largely inexpressible in numbers, and it's not an idea that can just be scored. And so, given that, we had great concerns about the general scoring system that the CQC were talking about. The CQC appeared to be working towards what they described as a dynamic rating system, which was a little bit unclear what it meant, but it was based solely, in some cases, on data and on intelligence. And in a lot of cases, this would actually be without a site visit. So it would be without a human being able to actually witness the care, speak to people, and do all the things that I've just described. And having worked for CQC and having done inspection for many years, it's just struck me that it was not remotely what a rating was or ever has been. And so, unsurprisingly to me, the rollout's been fairly disastrous, certainly for CQC, and it's been very anxiety-provoking for the sector. Now, I want to also refer to the problem statement again, because it's very strong. It says, and bear in mind, I'm quoting Kate Taroney here, the way we work is not working, and we're not consistently keeping people who use services safe. Our people are not able to effectively identify and manage risk and encourage improvement and innovation. Our organisational structure, flow of decision-making, roles, internal and external relationships do not promote a productive and credible way of working. Now, I think that's very strong, and it's as close as I've ever heard in all the time that we've had a national regulator, which is well over 20 years, of them saying something to the effect of, and I don't think this is an unfair paraphrase, we're failing and our systems and structures are useless. And essentially, that's what Neil and I said the other day in our article. So this feels like quite a big moment. So we thought it might be useful to have a chat about it and work out where CQC go from here.
So thank you, Simon, for that eloquent sort of introduction, really, and summary. It is a big moment, I think, in the history of the national regulators going back to 2002. I've not sort of come across a comparable situation. It's been apparent looking at the board meeting documentation at CQC over recent months that this has been brewing. They realise that these risks have been growing month on month. And I think what we've got here is we've seen a sort of top-down introduction of a new system, very much focused on IT, on data, basically sort of separating the role of the inspector and assessors. Assessors will get the intelligence and as it were, sort of put it through the sausage machine that is CQC these days. There are some major concerns about this particular framework. I can list a few. As follows. There was no baseline at all. At least when they brought in the ratings in 2014, they decided over a period of a couple of years that they would actually inspect all services comprehensively and actually get that baseline in place. They didn't do it with this particular framework. They didn't pilot it properly. They introduced it in a sort of hasty fashion for whatever reason, November, December last year. So that was a really poor way of implementing something which was pretty major, which obviously they've been discussing for sort of well over 3 years. So that was obviously one sort of issue, poor implementation. There's an issue about weighting. So they've got these quality statements, 34, I think they are. They all seem to sort of have equal value. Well, it's a complete nonsense to say that staffing, for example, is sort of equal to environmental sustainability. That's not to sort of, as it were, minimise the importance of environmental sustainability, but clearly, there's got to be appropriate weighting in terms of sort of aspects of the running of care services. Also, it's not clear to me anyway, aside from the issue that scoring doesn't really work, I think, theoretically or philosophically, as to what the thresholds are for scoring these evidence categories. So, how much evidence, how much documentation does one need to say, well, actually, we're going to give you a 3 rather than a 2 for a particular evidence category. So it's hugely subjective. It's really unclear how inspectors and assessors sitting down are going to be scoring these multiple evidence categories across quality statements and key questions. So also, it's not clear to me really how the SAF findings link to the regulations. Before, it used to be quite clear really with the CLOEs. So it's very vague in this new system about regulatory breaches and where they sit. There's a reference, let's say, to a breach of Regulation 12, but it really just sort of sits there in a report. And then you've got these bizarre outcomes where you've got situations where some services will actually be in breach of regulation, sometimes on multiple occasions, even with a warning notice in some cases, and yet they're going to be rated good under this new system. You've got other situations where it sort of goes the other way, really, that people are sort of being sort of marked down on the basis of carrying over these sort of legacy ratings and trying to score those legacy ratings sort of in present time. And I think that's one of the major weaknesses here, that they seem to want to sort of carry that forward so that they would only look at a small number of quality statements, priority statements, perhaps a few others. They wouldn't typically be looking at all of these quality statements. Now, I know that Ian Trenholm, before he left, indicated that they would be looking at all quality statements under key questions that are rated inadequate or requires improvement. But I've heard anecdotally that's not happening. So what does all of this mean? Well, it's a complete and utter disaster, really, in terms of regulation. We knew it was failing. It's taken 6-7 months since it was brought in for it suddenly to dawn on the high command at CQC that they actually had to say something to this review. It's been invoked by the Cabinet Office, but it is very, very worrying. And Simon and I, we're great believers in effective regulation. Regulation matters. So it means that CQC is going to have to do something, and it's going to have to do it quickly.
I'll just jump in here. I think one of the things that's been apparent really since this whole single assessment framework was introduced or was even spoken about is that it has induced a lot of anxiety among care providers. So it's clear that there's lots of upheaval. It's clear that there's lots of uncertainty. So where do you see things going from here over the next few months and years?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, as Neil started to allude to just then, it seems as though this problem statement was prepared after ministers announced a review of the CQC's effectiveness. That's what the HSJ article says. And this is going to be led by the North West London Integrated Care Board Chair, Penny Dash, and I believe that's going to happen in the autumn. And the review will examine how the CQC's recently updated assessment framework's working and whether its ratings are properly rewarding and incentivising the improvement of care. Well, as we've already described, we don't think it remotely is. So to be colloquial about it, CQC are in trouble here. They've not got very long as a national organisation to do something that is useful and does protect service users. They're going to have to do something really quite quickly. They don't have time, as far as I can see, to redesign a different system or anything like that. So where I think I don't know what they'll do, but what I think they should do is go very quickly back towards what they were doing before, which was to send inspectors out onto site to conduct inspections and to form ratings through their judgments in the way that they used to do with reference to the CLOEs, which were the key lines of inquiry, and get some ratings out there and find some concerns if those concerns are there, and do the regulatory work that people pay and expect them to do. They've only really got a few weeks and months to get doing that in order to be able to demonstrate to this Integrated Care Board chair that there's anything going on that's remotely fit for purpose. I'd further add that they have done this before. This is not something that, this is not something that's beyond them. In 2018, which was when Ian Trenholm joined the CQC, CQC weren't perfect. And, commentators would talk about problems here and there and so on, but they were functional. They were a functional national organisation. You could be sure that if you were rated inadequate as a care provider, they would be all over you. If you were rated requires improvement, you would get a follow-up visit within 6 to 12 months, which would basically would basically judge whether or not you had made the appropriate improvements. It also would then serve as an opportunity for providers that had made those improvements to have their ratings put back to good, and then they could go on. If you were good, you might not have an inspection for a couple of years or even 3, but you would have an inspection after that. And if you're a new provider, you could pretty much set your watch by the fact that within somewhere around the date of the anniversary of your first registration, you would get your first inspection. And that's completely fallen apart. And I speak as somebody who goes to care home after care home after care home, week after week after week, and it's completely different than ever it was. You hardly ever see the CQC inspectors now. Providers, they still talk about saying we're overdue, because they can't really understand why CQC aren't going anywhere near them. They're miles behind on what they should be doing. And in really simple terms, they need to get on with it. They need to strip it back to something as simple as possible, and demonstrate that they can function.
I wholeheartedly agree with what Simon has said there. There's a huge registration backlog as well within CQC. There have been sort of major problems with the portal, the sort of interface between CQC and providers and managers, all sorts of issues there as well. I think it's as fundamental, basically. I think CQC have sort of lost their way. I think they've sort of forgotten about their sort of statutory purpose in many ways. One of the issues that I think is really important is the frequency of inspection well, assessment, as they would call it these days. And although there's no minimum statutory frequency of inspection these days that there used to be until 2000, and I think it was 2006, 2007, it used to be sort of twice a year for care homes, for example. But there still has been a minimum frequency statutory in relation to performance reviews, that's rating reviews. And CQC has completely forgotten about that, really, post 2018. And there's been this drift. I mean, I appreciate there was the pandemic. We understand the extraordinary situation that was. But even since then, there's been this drift where they actually haven't been doing what they should be doing, which is setting a proper, effective, safe frequency of inspection and making sure you go out there and actually see what's happening, particularly in relation to requires improvement and inadequate services. But beyond that, I mean, even if services are good or outstanding, we know that they can change quite quickly with a change of manager or whatever it might be. So they should be going out there and they should be doing those inspections and scrutinising what's going on. I agree, between inspections, they can enhance their monitoring, and that's great, you know, they can do all of that, but they shouldn't really sort of minimize or sort of subordinate the inspection process. And I think the vision was that this was all going to be done with tech, it was all going to be done with AI, and basically sort of inspections and sort of the human element of regulation was pretty much secondary to all of this, when of course it's the primary aspect of regulation. You've got to go out there, you've got to assess, you've got to look at paperwork in the context of a living, breathing service to see if it's being sort of properly sort of used, implemented in the interests of protecting service users. And that duty of care is owed by CQC to each and every service user in this country. And CQC is saying, we're not effectively regulating, we're not managing risk, we're not keeping people consistently safe who use these services. I mean, what an admission that that is. You know, 6 years on, after sort of 2018, when Mr. Trenholm, when he joined the organisation, first of all. So I agree, we've got to go back to basics. It was a functional organisation back in 2018. They're going to have to strip away a lot of this nonsense that they've tried to introduce over the last 7 months and get back to what is actually sort of important in terms of regulation, which is inspection and making proper informed judgments against the key lines of inquiry and rating characteristics. Linked to the regulations as well, because let's not forget about regulations, because ultimately compliance is obviously fundamental to regulation as well.
No, I entirely agree with that. And I just want to zone in on one thing, that there's a very bad, pernicious assumption out there, and it's not just CQC that suffer from this, and it's about what a judgment is. Okay, that sometimes there have been inspection reports in the past that have what you might describe as poorly evidenced judgments, that they've not been particularly well written or well evidenced, and they make some criticisms. And the criticism of those reports is, well, that's just the inspector's opinion. And so you think, well, okay, but there's an assumption that lies within that criticism that an inspector's opinion isn't valid, and that somehow the inspector's opinion's bad, and that if there is more, if it's a better evidenced opinion, it no longer becomes an opinion, it becomes a fact. That's not true. A better evidenced opinion is still an opinion. It's just a better evidenced one. Because there's this sense that which, if you had enough data, or if you had enough data, essentially, if you had enough kind of like, you know, intelligence of all the kind of the different facts, that you don't need human judgment anymore. You just feed it into the computer and out it comes as the correct answer, in scare quotes. That's not right. That's a really pernicious, inaccurate idea. And I think CQC have fallen for it. And as Neil said, the primary element is the humans going in order to engage with and come to know the quality of the service. I've done this for 20 years. During the pandemic, people asked me if I would do online inspections. No, I wouldn't. I'll look at certain documents they've got, but I'm not going to do an online inspection, because unless I'm there in the service, I don't feel comfortable that I'm going to know what's going on. And that's one example of how you just know that you can't come to know the right answer unless you're there, looking at all the different nuances and the complexities of what care actually is. So in a way, this idea that you need more and more data and more tech and more systems and the computing power, it's a utopian dream. I understand why people get hooked into the idea, but as far as care is concerned, I think it's nonsense. And I think they need to get back to inspectors being on site and doing inspections and doing things that inspectors always used to do. There's a reason they always used to do it. It's because, while not perfect, it's the best we've got.
Yeah, I mean, I think, all of that's entirely valid, and I agree with that. And I think the other thing I wanted to say, I mean, obviously we're sort of, it's still good to find some positives coming out of all of this. But I mean, one thing I would say is that one of the reasons for sort of introducing this new system, one of the justifications was that they wanted to make life easier for the public to look at these reports, to get data, to get information, to be able to sort of reach a view about the adequacy of a care home where somebody might want to put their loved one in. I mean, I have to say now, I mean, when I look at these assessment reports that are being published, I think that they're far more opaque, far more difficult to actually sort of understand, comprehend, really. I mean, the public obviously don't see the evidence categories at this stage. I mean, CQC did say that they were going to publish the scorecards ultimately, but they haven't been published. But it's very difficult, I think, for them to actually look. When you look at the reports before they brought this system in, I mean, they got shorter over time anyway, but they were sort of reasonably clear. You could actually sort of see what the evidence was to justify a breach of a regulation, for example. So there was far more clarity, and I think it was far more sort of user-friendly as far as the public was concerned in terms of public assurance. And so there's that angle. And as I say, at the moment, I think that they're publishing assessment reports that just aren't accurate. They're just not a genuine reflection of the standard within particular services. So they're going to have to look at this, and they're going to have to look at it very quickly. The problem is, of course, is they've got contracts in place now, haven't they, with these assessors and inspectors, that they're going to do things in this new fashion. But they've realised that it's not working. And the chief proponent of this system is now going, I think, this week, possibly today, and they're going to have to look at it very quickly, and they're going to have to listen to their inspectors as well, because this was something that the inspectors had flagged up, I think, probably even a couple of years ago, that there was a reaction to all of this coming in. The unions weren't happy either. There was a lot of talk that this system wasn't fit for purpose, and yet they proceeded with it, didn't they? And then ultimately, after a 3.5-year gestational period, they then sort of introduce it post haste at the end of last year. So it has been an unmitigated disaster, I think. But they've at least realised now that there's a fundamental problem, and they're going to have to review it. They're going to have to go back to what I think they were doing before, which actually, broadly speaking, was working. They can improve on that system, I think, having learned some things through this process. It's not entirely negative, but yeah, they need to act quickly. I definitely, I agree with that.
Neil speaks of contracts as well that are in play. You're absolutely right. They've gone a certain amount down the road now. They've gone a certain way down the road of smashing up what went before in order for the new. And that really is a problem, because also when you look at some of their staff satisfaction surveys that are around, they're actually very, very poor. And the surveys are not poor, the surveys are very revealing, but the results are very poor. And so there's a very low morale within the CQC. I know personally lots of people who've left the CQC. I'm sure other people do too, because of this kind of issue. And so what they're going to have to turn that around. They're going to have to get inspectors back in and back doing the job that they actually felt that they were essentially employed for, which is going around and making judgments and protecting people. I am very pleased that they seem to have realised how badly this is going, and they're going to make some changes. And I genuinely wish them well in sorting it out, because it certainly needs doing. And as they themselves say, we're not protecting people, we're not encouraging improvement, and that's their purpose.
My final comment would just be to sort of reiterate all of that. I agree with that. I mean, the role of the inspector is crucial. It's a sort of real professional role. It's a central role. these are inspectorates. I mean, that's how they started their lives, as inspectorates, and now they're trying to sort of move away from that, or at least they've attempted to. But they've got to get back to their sort of core purpose, I think. And so that's what we want. We really want them to sort of go back to what they do best. And there are a lot of inspectors still within CQC. They've got the right values, the right approach. They want to make a difference. So I think the organisation really has to empower them and sort of allow them to do what they do best, which is to go out there, inspect, and actually write good, well-written reports with based on sort of clear, cogent evidence. So I wish CQC well, because I really want them to succeed, and I just want to finish on that positive.
Fantastic. I think we're going to round it up there. Thank you both for your time this afternoon. I'm sure everyone watching found it as interesting and insightful as I did, and obviously it'd be very we watch with interest for what happens next. So once again, thank you, and we'll sign off there.
Thank you.
Thank you.